Welcome to the Cultivating Health Equity Stories podcast. In this captivating series, we delve into the heart of health equity, sharing stories that illuminate the path toward a fairer, more inclusive healthcare landscape. Our mission is to amplify voices, challenge norms, and inspire change. Here is your host, Dr. Throy Campbell, a research scientist on health equity issues.
Today we welcome an inspiring guest, Arian Navarro. Arian wears multiple hats: public speaker, writer, educator, linguist, and cord blood bank collector. However, or perhaps, her most impactful role is that of an advocate for cancer survivors. As a young adult, Arian underwent a double cord blood stem cell transplant, defying the odds and emerging even stronger. Her passion lies in advocating for greater access to survivorship care and mental health services within the young adult cancer survivor community. Arian's focus extends specifically to underserved communities, where she tirelessly works to bridge gaps and empower those facing similar challenges. Arian, welcome to our Health Equity Stories podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad we could meet up in this setting. And Arian, on this podcast, we believe that health equity is a lived experience. We also believe that one's background helps to shape how they deal with a certain illness. So we would like you to tell us a little about your background before we go into your experiences with cancer. So growing up in Houston, Texas, what were some of the key influences in your life that shaped your identity and aspirations?
So, yes, I was raised in Houston, Texas. I had a very difficult childhood, but I also had very learning experiences. My parents divorced when I was 5. And so I was raised with my mother, a single mom, and my uncles and cousins and aunts. My mom is a family of 15, and I have lived with except for one, I've lived with every single one of them. And usually during the summers, when my grandmother and some of my aunts would come in the summer, it was like 15 people in that house with one bathroom. And so for me, I've been very good at trying to avoid or to lessen conflict.
Right.
And dealing with very, very outspoken, very blunt
Yes.
people
Right.
and passive aggressive people. I've been able to kind of deal with all of that. But I am very grateful because my mother, even though we were all raised in the Pentecostal church, which was very strict. After my mom's divorce, it was very hard for her to come back because, divorce is like something that you don't do. But my mom left my father because there was a lot of domestic violence. So it was just really hard for her to come back. And so we kind of parted ways for a little bit. And when in 4th grade, I had my first panic attack. And so I actually dealt with depression and anxiety. I was diagnosed at 10. And then because at that time, at 10 years old, I don't remember a lot of this stuff because a lot of it has been suppressed, but my mother kind of tells me.
Right.
But when I was 10, I tried to end my life through taking pills at 10 years old. I don't remember it. I don't know why I did it, but that was something that changed my life because my mother, instead of like thinking, at that time it was like spirits or, evil or something like to that kind of religious aspect of it, she just thought like, I need to take my daughter to a psychiatrist. And so I'm thankful for my mom that even though she wasn't raised with that thinking, my mother was able to have an open mind, and perhaps because she wasn't in the church, maybe that also helped. But I actually had to go to a psychiatric hospital for 2 weeks when I was 10 years old. And I was able to see children that were abused and, hearing screams, hearing, different stories about different other kids with abuse. It was enlightening. It was traumatic, but it was enlightening now that I look back, because I was able to have more of a sense of mental health being general health
Right.
because of what I experienced as a child. And I've always been interested in trying to understand people that cross the line, cross boundaries, and abuse children.
Right.
And I've been able, as an adult now, see that I can hold both the abuse that I suffered, but also the lessons that I learned and the resilience. That doesn't mean I'm excusing anybody who abused me, but I'm also not going to dwell on it and instead use that to kind of create a safe space for me and to know that I can leave or I can say no. And one of my biggest accomplishments, I think, in my lifetime has been to create a family that I wish I had as a child.
That's
So my two sons and my husband, I've been married to my husband for 20 years, and we've done marriage counseling. We've done, we're always talking. We're always, trying to understand each other, even though we were raised very differently.
yeah.
And so I've created a space where my children, myself, my husband, we're very open, very tolerant, we have very open conversations. There's no shame in being human. But all of that, I feel like it was because of what I saw as a child.
Yeah.
And so with that, I've been able to give my sons tools. Like, if you're having trouble with something, there is help out there. You can ask for help.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no shame in crying. There's no shame in having anxiety. There's no shame in anger. It's just a very open home. So I feel like that prepared me for cancer.
You have covered a lot of grounds in about a couple of minutes, and I appreciate it. Thank you for sharing such personal details. I picked up on your mom being a single mom and the struggles of life, yet she recognized at the time that her daughter needed to see a psychiatrist. And I commend your mom. And that another point you made, there are two ways to learn. It's demonstrated properly to you and you follow, or things don't go as it should and you say, no, that's just not how we should. And it's amazing how you did because of your life circumstances. And now in your own marriage, with your own family, you're able to come together with your husband and your kids and have this ideal setting and know how to deal with the challenges. Turn out to be a blessing, right?
Yeah, and it's taken me a long time to fully heal, especially my dad's abandonment, and he's actually had a stroke, and so things have changed between us where now I can talk to him, but it's very superficial. But I'm just grateful because now when he gets in a mood of trying to, I don't know, he's been very cold at times with me. He's told me as a child that I was in his family, or that he didn't want me to go visit him because I was going to destroy his marriage. When I was going through chemo, he told me he really didn't care. So that's another huge part of my healing, is having my biological father, who's supposed to love you unconditionally, completely reject you.
Yeah.
And then, going full circle now where he actually wants to leave his legacy to me, like almost like he's trying to make for lost time. And I've been able to navigate that better. And again, it has to do with my safe place, which is my husband and my two kids. That's my safe place.
Yes.
So it's like he's bonus now. And I think that has really helped me navigate my father and how to see him, how to understand him. And again, it's not necessarily excusing him, but I
I
love
think
him. And my mother did a good job of never saying anything negative about him.
right.
And so I only found out about the domestic violence as an adult.
I
So
think
my mom did a pretty good job.
and forgiveness and compassion heals, right?
Yeah, and I'm doing it mostly for myself than I am for him. It's for my inner child, and understanding that, whenever my father says, when you were sick, I would go to these churches and ask for prayer. It's healing for me.
Right.
Yeah.
It's clear that religion played an important role in your growing up, and it helped you to navigate these challenges. and we want to highlight that. Now, you went on to UT Austin. Can you tell us about your early college days and how it also shaped you as a
So most of my high school, I just focused on making good grades because I knew that my life would begin at college because I would
yeah.
be out of my house.
Wow.
You know, they were very strict with me. I had my first high school boyfriend, and for dates, we would go to church.
Mm.
And my mother would say, no, you have to be here at 9. And one time I was late because they were, it was a Pentecostal church. So they were still like,
Yeah.
and I was with his parents and his sisters. And my mom was so upset. Like, how could he come home late at 10 with his parents? But when I went to college, all of that went away. And I think I'm grateful to my mother because I now practice the same thing where my goal is to discipline my children so they can have self-discipline as adults. And
Right.
so my mom did a good job in that sense of me having self-discipline. So when I went to college, that's the first time I was able to drink. At 19, I had my first alcohol, and I got drunk with a friend who also lived in a very strict household. And so we locked the door and we had our first drinks. And then it was just me and her at the apartment trying alcohol and like
Wow.
just being silly.
Yes.
But we were always trying to be safe. We called our friends like, hey, we're going to lock the door. We're going to drink. We don't know what's going to happen. And really nothing happened. But it was a very innocent kind of beginning when I was in college. But then afterwards, I just felt free. And one of the things that changed me in college was reading the writings of John Paul Sartre.
Hmm.
And the reason why is because in one of his books, he talks about what is good, what is evil, and how it can seem differently for people. And he talked about a son going to war, like in the patriotic side of it. It's like, wow, he's giving his life for his country. But then from the mother side, who has the only child,
Mm.
and that's her child, she doesn't want to lose her child, but he's still leaving from her perspective.
Right.
Why are you giving your life to the country when you're my son?
Right.
And that really helped me start breaking away from this absolute good or absolute evil. And
Mhm.
I think that was key in me understanding my childhood. So that just like completely changed the way I perceived people and
And
the
that
way I
came
perceive.
that came from the fact that you were doing literature. You were doing a BA in in
Yes,
English, right? And so you were
yes,
reading a lot of literature, and you're saying
yes,
your early education at UT Austin was helping you to frame your background and your heritage, and help you to evaluate and go forward
yes.
as a person, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Even when I was reading Nietzsche, which right now I don't really care for him, but at the time, at 20 years old,
Yeah.
seeing Nietzsche, I mean, he did have syphilis at the end of his life, so maybe he was going a little crazy, but what I remember of Nietzsche's writing was that he made a whole like argument about something, and then the next page he would completely contradict it. Like basically like he was able to argue both sides,
Hmm.
and that was helpful to me, even though I don't really care for his writings, the content,
But it gives you
but
the framework, right?
the idea
Yeah.
of being able to see both
Look at both
sides,
sides, right?
being okay with as a person changing perspectives.
So
And
you went to UT Austin with the intention of majoring in English, or
no,
because it seems like it was just ideal for you. It helped you to again reflect on your background and give you a framework on how to evaluate life, and it had a tremendous
no, no,
impact.
no. Well, I started off because everybody wanted me to be a doctor, engineer, that whole thing. So I started with neuroscience, but then I was like, I love the brain, but I don't want to go into the science part of it. So then I said, well, let me do deaf education.
Hmm.
But then I was like, I don't want to do any of that. I want to write. I want to be a writer. I want to I like analyzing characters and people and history. And
Hmm.
so I changed my major, and it was a major disappointment to my family. I got so much, negative comments. My grandfather, he said so much intelligence for nothing. Like I was going to waste my intelligence by doing English, or he said that's what rich people major in.
Yeah.
But I tried those other avenues, but really when I started my English courses and did just different philosophers, different, you know, Emerson, and just reading all kinds of thoughts and different times of history and how things have changed and evolved, like that was just fascinating to me. And
Yeah.
so I did it, and everybody was unhappy because they thought it wouldn't be challenging enough for me. But if they only knew that writing is not
It
easy,
is.
it's a
It is.
challenge.
It
But
is.
at the time, I was in the right place. Like I took a class about Milton, and we focused on Paradise Lost. It was the most fascinating thing because what we had to do is actually look at all the references that Milton talks about in the Paradise Lost and how it reflects not only biblical references but cultural references. And it was, yeah. So I realized that that's where I belonged. So it
Yeah.
was a journey, and I had to have confidence. And I think I built my confidence once I was in college because I had very low self-esteem growing up. I always thought I was the ugliest person. I always thought like I would never have, anybody to love me. Or also because of my trauma, I would also say that men were just there to crush a woman's spirit. And I think that was because of the way the religion where the women kept quiet and the men were the men of the household.
Right.
So all of that kind of just I was able to analyze it and break it down. And so
You
that
know,
kind of
and
helped
that's
me.
and that's the point here. And we're going to talk more about using writing help one to again pull together their life story and help you to perhaps flush out your illness experience and help you to navigate it forward. Clearly, when you discovered English as a major at UT Austin, it helped you with what you were reading and how you were writing, helped you to frame your life, and you found yourself and what you wanted to do. That's powerful, and I'm hoping that young listeners to this podcast will recognize how the different ways to one's career path. I understand your parents and your granddad, you said, who wanted you perhaps to do a degree that was translatable to an immediate career. If you're an engineer, chances are in Texas, right? You're going to get an
Yes.
engineer job right away. If you're a nurse, there are many hospitals. But if you're a writer, what do you do? And part of what you're telling today is your story as a writer and how it influenced your health path and your current profession. Nice. Thank you for sharing that. And we want to talk about your cancer experience, of course. So perhaps let's start with this question. Share with us, your cancer journey, starting from discovering your diagnosis to the family adjustments and support you receive, perhaps.
So I was a kindergarten teacher, a bilingual kindergarten teacher. It was towards the end of my first year of teaching. I stayed at home with my first son for the first 4 years. And then when he went to pre-K, I decided to
Go with
teach.
him. Yeah.
Well, he was in a different school, but
Yeah.
I taught bilingual kindergarten. Towards the end, when I was making copies for a workbook for the summer, I remember feeling lightheaded. I was 26 at the time. I told my mother that, I've been feeling dizzy. And my mother, now she's a nurse. She had already graduated as a nurse. And she said, well, you're 26 years old. You should not be feeling that way. And it was just lightheadedness. And I went to see my CP, primary care physician, and she's like, you know what? Let's just do a whole blood work. Let's check your heart. Maybe it's that. And whenever I got my CBC, I was extremely anemic.
Mhm.
And so the next step was to get a bone marrow aspiration and biopsy. And so then she referred me to someone that was local and where I live. And he said, it's acute leukemia. And so I remember because I went with my mother and my husband, and that was the first time I saw my husband cry. And my mother was just completely shocked. And to give more background information, my brother, he was older than me. He passed away at 4 months from cancer.
Mm.
So my mom had already kind of seen that, and to have another child that is dealing with cancer, it was very hard for her. But what happened is went in straight into survival mode, which is what I talk about when it comes to survivors, is that, when we're going through treatment, when we're going through, the hospital and doing all that stuff, we're just like focused on that day, surviving that day. So I just went to work and just looked at the insurance, looked at FMLA, looked at all of that. And I think that really helped me focus more on, not focus so much on my cancer diagnosis. And thankfully, that doctor was able to refer me to MD Anderson. And so that's when I had my first appointment with the leukemia oncologist.
Specialist, right.
And at first it was very, very hard because everything was so new. You have like orientation. And then the doctor that I had in the beginning, he wasn't very comforting. He was very much like, what's your medical record number? And like, wouldn't even look at me sometimes. So my mom was so upset.
Yeah.
And my mom said, I'm going to go to that appointment with you and I'm going to tell him, if this was your daughter, would you treat her like, But I guess he was really smitten by my mother, that after that it changed. He was actually pretty nice after that. So that was something else. And
I want to probe a little bit before you go forward, because you're saying a whole lot here. You said you went straight into survival mode. I think that's connected with the background you just described.
Yes.
Who you were. You're clearly a resilient person, and you're going to make it wherever you are, whatever your diagnosis. You're going to make it. You just learned you have leukemia, and you went into survivor's mode. How important is that? Can you emphasize that just for?
Well, I think it's almost like I had no choice, because my son was 5. My oldest son was 5 years old at the time. My husband and I had been married for 5 years, and we had just bought a house. It was just a lot of newness in my life, a lot of things that I was starting, that I think it just kind of went with it. Like, it was just another new thing that I'm experiencing and that I'm trying to figure out. But yeah, and I have a huge family. And my husband's family is also huge, and they're very helpful. So I had aunts from Mexico come in and help me with my kids and with my kid at the time. So I think that's what helped too, is I did have a support system. And my mother's a nurse, and in a way I knew that she would advocate for me. So it was just kind of a teamwork.
Mentally, you knew you were more than just an illness, right?
Oh, yeah. And I saw myself as, I know this sounds weird, but as a child, I remember I would drink pickle juice because I loved it.
Yes.
And my grandma would tell me, she would tell my mom, hey, Arian is drinking pickle juice, she's going to get leukemia. Like, I remember as a child hearing that. And so I remember, like, I was thinking about it, like, oh yeah, if I had leukemia, it was just a weird thing I would daydream about, that I would be okay. So I would keep drinking the pickle juice. And so it's almost like that. I looked back to that and basically saying, like,
it's not
there's nothing I could do about it. I just had to, like, roll with the punches, like I have in other times of my life, and just, I don't know, well, at first it was ignorance is bliss. I will say that. The first time I got cancer.
There are times when ignorance serves a good purpose, know, because if you're too knowledgeable of your illness and your your situation, it can take you down. And that's what I'm probing at, because I can sense your mental strength and how you decided that you were going to face cancer and overcome it from the very beginning,
But however, I will be very honest, the second time when I relapsed, that was not good. I was angry, and I was like, this is how I feel. Like, when I went through cancer the first time, I didn't know what I was getting into. And I think the most difficult thing to deal with when you have many rounds of chemo is that, you get chemo and your immune system's going to go down and you feel terrible. You throw up. It's the worst. It's like you have the flu, but then you have to work to recover.
Yeah.
But then, because there's more rounds of chemo, that you have to take the chemo again, and you again are going to go all the way down again, and you have to fight your way up again, and then take the medicine, the chemo, and then do that all over again. That really messes up with
Yeah.
your
Your
psyche.
mental
It
strength.
it did.
Yes.
It did.
Yeah.
And it got to the point where I remember telling my husband, like, I just want to feel something else. I just want to like bang myself against the wall. I just want to feel something else. And actually, that's when I understood people that, self-inflict.
Yes.
I never understood that before, but when I was going through that, I was like, oh, this must be how they feel
Yeah.
and why they resort to that, because I felt so like tired of feeling the same pain. Even if it wasn't excruciating, it was always there. And that drove me insane. And I had different instances where I had an allergic reaction to a platelet transfusion, little things like that where I didn't know what was happening and I automatically thought like this is the end for me. I'm not going to make it. So that also really facing your mortality at such a young age is very like just hard. It was very difficult to kind of change that innocence of being young and feeling invincible, and that was completely shattered the first time.
Did it cause you to kind of think through life and say there are certain things that are important and certain that might not be that much?
I actually, during the first time with with leukemia, the first time around, I did hold on to my faith a lot.
Yeah.
That was my way of kind of coping with it, and thinking that I had not a greater purpose, but
Yeah.
this happened and in some way I was going to come out a better person. But it's really hard for me to remember because I'm very much the type of person that when I go through very difficult times, I do suppress it.
Right.
So sometimes it's a little fuzzy, but I can tell you how I was feeling.
Yeah.
But the biggest, for me, the most consequential time was the second time I got sick.
Okay.
That's when every part of my being was shattered.
Yeah.
I got, I was raised in a very much word of faith kind of religion,
Right.
where if you're faithful, if you're, you will be blessed.
Right.
And so I had testified at church. I had, everything. I felt I had done everything right. And I actually got pregnant 9 months after my last chemo. I had my son, but then 3 months after my son was born, I relapsed.
Mm.
And so during the first round with cancer, I had a lot of people say, like, you're such an inspiration. You're so great. God only gives, his strongest,
Yeah.
I really hate that saying, by the way.
Yeah.
But that was more like I was an inspiration and I kind of went along with that. And maybe that helped me survive the first time around. The second time around, I'm like, I remember actually being in this actual room that I'm in now, and I remember crying and screaming and angry at God, like, I did everything. Why are you going to do this again to my oldest son and now to my 3-month-old son? Like, I did this, I did that, and it was just like angry. And I think everything that I was raised with the word of faith and being the good Christian, and how it was just completely
Yeah.
gone,
It was
that
gone.
idea.
Yeah.
And so I lost my innocence in a different way.
Yeah.
So the first time it was more about my mortality. The second time was everything that I believed about higher power and all of that was completely like, it doesn't mean anything. And so the second time around is when I was really depressed. It was very hard for me. And also because I knew what was going to happen. I knew the chemo. I knew what I was
Take
going to
it
start
on,
feeling.
right.
And it wasn't until later that I understood that before a transplant, you get like the atomic bomb of chemos.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Thanks for listening to Cultivating Health Equity Stories. Remember, our mission is to amplify voices, challenge norms, and inspire change. Go to cultivatehealthequity.com, sign up on our email list, subscribe for future episodes, and find the resources mentioned in the show notes. Until next time.